to Fred's parents on July 28th. They received it on August 17th, and this is the content of that letter as it was published in the Columbus Dispatch. My dear Mr. and Mrs. Norton, it gives me the greatest grief, yet it is with the most wonderful spirit of affirmation that I write this letter regarding the death of your wonderful son, Fred, on duty here at the front. It was the most awful loss this squadron could endure and has left us, officers and men alike, dumbfounded and overcome. Fred was my right-hand man, second in command of this squadron, and one in whom I had every trust and confidence, coupled with pride and satisfaction. Let me relate the circumstances, sad and heart-rending, but those of a real soldier in real fighting for a real cause. And he goes on to describe the air fight that Fred was in with the 20 German planes. Fred was a born leader. He seemed to possess a wonderful ability for handling men. Those in his flight simply worshipped him. He had been recommended for a squadron command because of his gallantry in the field on many occasions. He would undoubtedly have commanded a squadron within a month had he lived. Do not grieve over his loss. Rather, be proud that he fought and died so bravely. For this squadron, he is not dead. He is ever present in spirit, an example for us all of true American manhood, fighting full out to make the world free for democracy. All his personal property will go forward in due course, smaller articles by registered mail and the heavy by freight. Let me extend to you the sincerest sympathy of every officer and man in this squadron, as they certainly suffer with you in this great sacrifice. Yours sincerely, Harold Hartney, Major. Fred was buried in France. We see these images today of the American cemeteries, and unless you really think about it, you have this illusion that they went from the field and right into one of those beautiful cemeteries. Of course, that's not reality at all. They were buried in cemeteries within the field. I included this just to show you what those initial burial places were like in the field. This is Lieutenant Quentin Roosevelt's field grave site. He was with the 95th Squadron, the one in the pursuit group with Fred Norton, and he was killed 6 days before Fred Norton. Zenos Miller, the man whose diary I read a small portion of for you, he was one of the other 4 pilots who went up with Fred that evening of July 20th, and his plane went down along with one other plane. Another person was killed, and Zenos Miller was captured and was a prisoner for the rest of the war. Fred is buried in this American military cemetery in France, just a short distance from where he died in battle. All of the American cemeteries for World War I soldiers in France are beautiful, and if you are interested, you can request a photograph be mailed to you, which I did. This is actually Fred's cross. All of the crosses in this particular cemetery are made of Carrara marble from Italy. And the photos come to you the size of this top. I was just hoping for a small 8 by 10, but that's not what arrived. Okay.
All right, we're running into the time for meeting,
Yep.
so we'll have to go to it. But Fred was remembered for a number of reasons. He was received Distinguished Service Cross, which was a high honor. He was this is
French.
French honor, and the French. And this was the Danbury High School, or Lakeside High School's first yearbook, and this was dedicated to him. And the honor at the school to this day, the highest honor of a senior, is the Norton Award. The Norton Field was the first commercial airport in Columbus. It was dedicated in 1920, and many of the famous flyers in the early days, Eddie Rickenbacker, and so on, were there at Norton Field dedication. It is no longer in existence. There's a matter about it. Jimmy Doolittle was there, Charles Lindbergh, and Billy Mitchell. That's about as high as you can get in the early days of military aviation. Lindbergh returned and so forth. And
Norton Field lasted until 1949 and became a housing subdivision in Whitehall. Next slide, Dave. It does have a historical marker, but the only other way you would know it had been there is that the streets within the subdivision have names like Norton Way, etc.
okay, now and Fred Norton House. Gretchen just tells me it's still standing at Ohio State, and that it was actually her dormitory at
My
one time.
dormitory, it opened in September of 1963, and Gretchen Curtis, this little girl from Kenton, Ohio, went there with her 2 suitcases 2 years later, September of '65.
And the flying jacket that he was wearing when he was shot, with blood stains on, is now on display at the Air Force National Museum in Dayton. And the Ohio State Athletic Department has honored him on a number of occasions. And he's been inducted in one thing or another to the Ohio Military Hall of Fame. The room in this hallway in the schoolhouse here. And Fred's family, unfortunately, never returned to Marblehead except the Nortons, who remained. And here you see what's happened to them all. Okay, we're ready to go. I'm going to just trying to say the local thing. We mentioned his classmate in high school, the nurse. She married the doctor, Dr. Belt, whose grandfather had been one of the founders of Lakeside and was part of the government named Kenton Rowe, and he became followed his father-in-law as the head doctor at the Marblehead Hospital, had an office, and where they're standing over there was Dr. Belt's office. So that right here was it was the back room in the slack house. So thank you for your we stole 2 of your minutes.